Welcome to Grief Uprooted, a podcast dedicated to sharing your grief stories. Together, we embark on the mystery of one's grief journey as they learn to live, heal, and be courageous in a world rooted in trauma. Join myself, Christine, in an open discussion to help you uproot the grief in all our lives. I am an award-winning author, professional speaker, and humanitarian in the field of grief and trauma. I want you to be part of the discussion. Here at Grief Uprooted, I've really taken a step back to figure out how collectively we can go from grief to growth, how I can help you and myself take our grief and grow from it. So many times in grief, we feel alone, isolated. That's why collectively, we're going to create that space for ourselves and society in this universe. But often we forget that there are others experiencing grief. So many times I hear people say, well, I'm experiencing grief, I'm going through it. But truly, grief hits everyone. It doesn't matter your wealth, your race, your culture, your career, your lifestyle. Grief does not discriminate. It impacts us all. I want to read something to you. In today's world, grief and adversity are seemingly everywhere, more so than ever. These universal concepts cause many to suffer and lose hope. Walk On is a silent-centered guidebook for overcoming struggle while teaching that the answers towards leading a filled, full life with purpose and meaning reside within you. These are the words of Stephen Panus. He has been a publicist, sports marketing, executive, artist, attorney, motivational speaker now. But he has a history of working with champions, from Super Bowl winners to Indy 500 legends. Yet the only title that mattered to Stephen was father. What takes a man from this level of success and career to change direction completely? What caused Stephen to take a step back and dive within himself to find that purpose and meaning of life? There is only one thing in life that causes us to change drastically towards something that has purpose and meaning, and that is grief. We go from grief to growth, and that growth is not easy. So I'm excited to explore Stephen's journey and share it with you. So I am absolutely so excited to have you here today. And before we get started, the reason I'm super excited is because I've been telling all of you that are listening that grief affects everybody, and it can really cause us to grow in directions that some of us really want to grow in, but some of us may not want to grow in because of that level of fear. So before we start today's podcast, Stephen, I would love for you to just tell us where you're kind of tuning in and what was life like before grief entered?
Yeah, hey Christine, it's nice to be here. I'm from Southport, Connecticut, about an hour outside New York City. And my life before I lost my son, Jake, was pretty normal. We have two boys, Jake and Liam. Jake's the oldest by 5 years. My wife's name is Kelly, and we had lived in every time zone. My background is in sports and entertainment, so we've moved to a lot of places. But we had been here in Connecticut. It settled in for 10 years when the accident happened. And we were just like any other regular family, right? We had our ups and downs, but we were a close-knit group and deep faith, and certainly seemed to make the best of everything and had a lot of joy in our life.
I think sometimes we don't realize that life was that way. I think sometimes when grief walks through the door, you're kind of like, wow, what I had seems so seemingly easy.
Yeah, I was just gonna use that word, easy.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then all of a sudden, it's like, "Holy smokes, I missed that." So, what happened to Jake? Tell us a little bit about your grief story and how that all came about.
Yeah, so Jake was, he just turned 16 years old in May of 2020,
Mm.
and, he started dating his first girlfriend.
Ooh.
She was a year older, and, in, early August, she invited Jake to join her family, her mom and her brother, on a getaway weekend to Block Island. It's a small island off the coast of Rhode Island.
Mm.
And we initially said no. We'd just gotten back from our own family vacation, and we thought they'd just been dating just for a few weeks. And so we said no, you know. Um, and then a storm came through our town, like a microburst storm, but it took out a lot of trees and took out power. It was
Mhm.
very hot. We were running on a generator, and Jake was persistent. And we finally relented and said, okay, we don't have air conditioning. Let him go enjoy a weekend. It's the big deal. My wife texted with the other mother, and her last text to us was, nothing to worry about. I'll be watching the kids. They left on Friday morning, August 7th, which is the last time I saw my son alive. And 2 days later, my wife and I just finished a bike ride, and the phone rang. It was about 1 in the afternoon, and it was the other mom, and she said there had been an accident and Jake was injured, and that was the only details that she had. So we quickly packed a bag, and the three of us, Kelly, Liam, Jake's little brother, and myself, hopped into a car, and we started to speed towards Rhode Island. It's about a 2 hour drive. And then presumably we would take a ferry over to Block Island. We were about 12 minutes into the drive when we received a phone call, and it came through the car speaker.
Oh boy.
It was a doctor from Rhode Island. He introduced himself, and he paused, and then he said, I'm sorry, I just pronounced your son dead.
Oh.
And everything kind of went black. And I was flying in the left lane. I had to get over, um, which was took a lot. My wife screamed the most primal scream I've ever heard. Um, we
Mm.
pulled off the expressway, and it was a Sunday, and we pulled into an empty, literally right off the expressway. It was a bank, and I just pulled straight ahead. I may have even run the light. I don't know. I mean, we got out of the car, we screamed, we cried, we ran circles, and then we just hugged each other and fell as one broken blob of humanity. It was just the most traumatic thing that's ever happened in my life, in our life. It's profoundly upsetting and life altering. My life will never be the same. I recognize that. I'll never be whole, or at least the person I was before August 9th. Jake was just an incredible kid. I mean, we all dote on our kids, but he was special. He was one of a kind. He was fun-loving, infectious, magnetic personality. The kid, his ticket was golden. He could do anything he wanted to do. He was a great athlete, but he was a better person. He was kind and caring. He was empathetic, and he lived his life with a real simple mantra, which was he lifted up others and he spread joy. He always had a smile on his face, and he was gorgeous. He had blonde curly hair, an afro, curls that men and women would kill for, um, and just a smile as wide as his face. And um, we knew he was different from the get-go. He was our first child, so we took him everywhere. And by age 5, he was really comfortable holding conversations with adults, um, looked him in the eye,
I'm gonna
shook
take
their
you
hand.
back. Um, all of you are well aware of the fact that I cry so easily, but I purposely um, never wanted to hear my guest stories until we're recording. And that's because I think a lot of us don't understand the response we're going to have. And I think it's so difficult to talk to people about grief. Um, and I hear your story, and it so hits me because my first death notification was delivered by a family member in a car. And hearing my brother had died from a fall over Niagara Falls into the gorge in the car, I can't imagine your wife and your son Liam sitting there and hearing this over the speakerphone, and you as as being able to control this car and pull yourselves over. Um, you know, I I want to say I don't know the right words, but, good for you to be able to pull that together at that moment, because I think your world is shattering and you're watching 2 people you love, and then you're controlling this vehicle. It seems ever so easy to say, "I can just drive and pull over." Um, you can't, because you're right, everything just goes black. And, that's a horrific way of hearing that your son has died, um, especially for the whole family. Um, may I ask how he died? Like, did he fall or was it an
Yeah, so we
oh,
didn't learn the details until later that night. He was a passenger in a vehicle that was operated recklessly
mm,
and off the road and hit a telephone pole. Jake was in the front passenger seat and his head hit the pole. Um, the driver was arrested on reckless driving charges and driving under the influence, and the driver was his girlfriend.
oh shit.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No,
Sorry.
you don't have to apologize. It's brutal.
And it's that decision. I have 26, 28-year olds, and I remember the very first time that one of them wanted to go away. And I hesitated. I did say yes. But it is such a hard decision. And oh boy, oh boy. Wow.
Yeah. That's
Experiencing all this. Go ahead. What were you gonna
I was
say?
just going to say that's the thing. We think we have control.
Oh yeah.
And then
That's
something
very
like this happens and you realize like we did everything possible on our end, but
mhm.
still I blamed myself. My wife blamed herself when this happened, even though we weren't there, we had no control. Jake knew right from wrong. Um, the mother handed the keys over to the daughter and stuffed 7 teenagers into this SUV. Uh,
Yeah,
so many things went wrong that day, but again, it was just the mother wasn't doing what she was supposed to do, which was watch the children. And had she would have realized they had been drinking and that her daughter had no business being behind the wheel.
yeah.
So
That
just that control thing, you really feel like you have control, and it's just it's an illusion.
it is
We let them go away to sleepaway camps and sports camps and friends' houses and school and sporting events and never batted an eye and didn't really bat an eye on this one. And then you realize you have no control.
yep, yep.
You
And I
don't know
think
what,
that is the thing about grief that just takes you and goes, you think you have control over this little life you're living, and it is something that walks in, and it's non-discriminating, doesn't give a crap
yeah,
about who you are.
exactly.
It just
Totally indiscriminate.
yeah, and takes over and just throws it all. And I guess, experiencing this, um what takes you down a road? Like, I know myself as a young child, what took me down a road of writing a book and becoming an author. But when I hear your story, and what takes you to the point that you go, I've got to become an author, I've got to write a book. Like, what moves you to this? Um,
It really wasn't that. I was struggling and I was in a really dark place.
mhm,
We all were. Um, and I looked at Liam one day and I was like, wow, I'm 50 at the time, 52 years old, and I'm struggling with this. And I looked at little Liam and I said, I'm struggling at this age as a grown ass adult. How is he supposed to handle this?
exactly. Yep.
And so I knew that as broken as I was, I had a responsibility to make sure that um, Liam got through this and that I would be there for him. And so I started to write as a survival.
Yep.
And it was just a goodbye letter to Jake initially. It was just to get stuff out. I knew keeping it in wasn't healthy.
Yeah.
And the more I kept it in, the angrier I was getting, the darker it was getting. So I figured, okay, let's just put it on paper and write a letter to Jake. And as it began to evolve, and the more I looked at Liam and saw a struggle, the more I realized that I had to kind of, I think as you know, like when this happens, your belief systems are shattered. You don't know what to believe. You don't believe in anything anymore.
Mhm.
Um, the value systems that you relied on aren't, you can't trust anything anymore, right? You're left in a very ambiguous state that's not comfortable at all. And so I asked Liam one day, this was well over a year. I said, Liam, meet me outside and bring your buck knife. And he did. He came out with his knife, and we walked across our property to an old tree. And I said, cut off a square of that bark. And he obliged and did it. And he said, now what? And I said, well, now we're gonna watch this tree regrow new bark, and it's gonna heal. And it's gonna be different. It's gonna look different, maybe a different color. It's gonna feel different, but it will cover the hole.
Mm.
And I said, just like the tree, that's what we're going to do with our hearts. And I'm not telling you we're going to be the same, because we're not, but we're going to be able to mend our hearts in a way that allows us to walk on. And sure enough, like a year after that, he came running over. He's like, Dad, look at the tree. It's grown back.
Yeah.
And that was an important step. And then I had this tradition with my boys where I wrote them morning messages on Post-it sticky notes. And they were little quotes and adages and truisms and about values and things that I was just trying to impart wisdom and compassion and knowledge into their developing heart, mind, and soul. And I had to revisit those because I had to make sense of them. And that's when the concept, if you will, of there's something greater here than a goodbye letter to Jake. And I started revisiting these quotes that I left for him. And I'm like, I got to make sense of them now in my state of grief. And do they make sense?
Yeah.
And so that process led to a lot more writing. And that's when I finished, I said, maybe there's a book here that can help not just Liam, but others. And I went for it. I sent out like 40 pitch letters blindly. And I got tons of rejections, as I expected, but I got 4 that were interested, 1 agent and 3 publishers, and held a bunch of different interviews and hit it off with Kohler Books. And next thing you know, the book's published.
That's fantastic. And
Yeah.
I think, one of the amazing parts of this story is that you've joined rather ventures with your son. You were able to say, this is what's going to happen. And I think sometimes we look at grief and we think, it's bad, it's scary, I don't want anything to do with it. But you had this ability to kind of go, wait a second, this is going to change me. But in light of it, it's changing you in a way that is bringing you and Liam closer. Do you find that relationship has kind of come
Oh,
closer?
yeah. I think we're all closer as a result. And we were pretty close to begin with.
Yeah.
But you certainly, like when Liam says love you to almost anything we ask, or if he's leaving the house, love you, it's a hello and a goodbye now. That's our love you. Because when we said goodbye to Jake, and I write about this in the book, we were on our mudroom porch. It's 7 a.m. It was a hot, already sweltering early August morning. And his girlfriend arrived, and he literally looked at us right before he hugged us, and he goes, "You're all acting like you'll never see me again." And
Oh.
that's the words he said. And then we hugged him, and he walked down the driveway, and he flashed his signature peace sign and hopped in the car, and they sped away, and I never saw him again.
Wow. It's interesting that Liam, how old was Liam when this happened?
11.
Yeah.
He's 15 now. Yeah. We're coming up on the 4-year marker.
Yeah.
August.
And that seems to be a common thing in families, that I love you becomes just a normal phrase now. Like, you just say I love you, and they just adapt it because it's like, this may be my last time seeing you.
Mhm.
And that, as if you were to choose something beautiful that comes out of grief, it is that ability to express love now. That, it's okay for this man and this boy to express their love. That's pretty
Yeah.
profound. That is,
Yeah. I think it's only in the darkness that we discover that we can be present with the darkness of others as well.
yes, definitely.
There's a relatability, sadly,
Mhm.
that allows us to connect
Mhm.
and empathize and sympathize and just be there, right? Sometimes you don't have to say a word, but just being there for
Just
someone.
there's is the part. So we're just going to take a small break, and I'm going to leave you with a question of, what was the best advice you were given while you were writing this book? And we'll be right back.
We interrupt this podcast for a dirty moment.
I think I probably have several dirty moments, but one in particular is when I get back on that same highway and drive that direction, I'm certainly triggered by the events of August 9th and receiving that phone call. And I have to really concentrate and then breathe. And breathing's a big part of anything, but really breathe it out and breathe it through and just to get past it. But Jake left such a large Jake could have been governor of the state. He just left a footprint everywhere. So his presence in this town was everywhere, and which means there's triggers everywhere, whether it's passing the high school, parks, the grocery store, you name it. Jake was everywhere. He played sports, so he was in travel teams and all over this county. Kids knew him. So it's a challenge just to live here still, and we're doing it for Liam so that he can graduate from high school with his friends. But I do look forward to getting away from here one day because it's a trigger just living here.
Okay, we're back. So what was the best advice after hearing your story and how you, to me, would be traumatic, heard the death notification over, the phone in the car and pulling the car over, and just reiterate the story of the tree and the bark with your son. You can see as you're telling me the story, you're going deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper within yourself to find all this. But in that, I'm sure writing a book, you've reached out to people, asked people's advice. Did you find people were approaching you? I hate labeling gender, but you are a man. And a lot of times people don't know what to say and don't know what to do. So I'm curious what your best advice was that you were given, and how did people kind of treat you? If that
I
makes
don't
sense.
think a lot of people knew I was writing, so that was kind of easy and eliminated a lot of that. My therapist basically said the best advice was just write when you're ready to write, and when you're not, that's okay. Because it was hard. I would write sometimes and then I'd need 3 weeks off because it was just gutting. But the more I wrote, the more hopeful and inspirational it became. And that's one of the things I try to message about the book. It's not all sad. I joke that, yeah, you're going to cry. You should, if you're a human being. But you're also going to laugh. There's funny moments in there, and there's a lot of inspiration and motivation to become the best version of yourself. Because I do think when something like this happens, we are gifted, if you will, this perspective of life that so many take for granted or can't see, no matter how hard you try to tell them. You have to experience, I think, something so profound and life-altering that it really compels you to rethink everything.
Yeah, and you said a key word there, therapist. I think
Yeah,
as I too have a therapist, and I think that so many of us don't realize, even writing this book and doing this work you're doing, um, I have people I talk to because every day I'm consuming stories and working in this industry,
sure.
and a lot of times people say, "How do you stay in it? How do you stay in something for 24 years that's this sad?" But
Yeah,
that I see not sadness, I see growth. I see this amazing man before me who handled this horrific thing that may have not been your son, but grief hits everyone. It's going to hit us eventually. And that being your own death or someone else's death. And how you handle it, it's really not the event that allows you to grow. It's how you're responding to the event. And
yeah. And it's
your
so true.
no, go ahead.
Grief is just one form of adversity, right? There's so many other forms of grief,
Mhm.
like financial struggle,
Yeah.
failed relationship,
Mhm.
uh, health diagnosis that's fatal
Yeah.
or not positive. We all struggle, and that's kind of what I write about in the book. We all suffer
Mhm.
in some shape or manner, and no matter how it happens or when it happens, you have to find a way to walk on. And you are confronted with that, ultimately a choice. And that's where I landed. Like I said, a year and change after this event, I did a lot of reading, and my therapist sent me Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning.
Mhm.
And that really left a mark because his biggest takeaway or insight is that forces beyond our control can take away everything we possess except one thing, and that's our ability to choose how we respond to the situation. We don't control what happens in life. but we do control what we think and feel about what happens to us. And then days later, I read this story about this boy from Texas who was 17 years old. He dove into a pool and misjudged the depth, and he broke his neck,
Mhm.
and he became paralyzed from the waist down. They interviewed this boy 20 years later at age 37, and they asked him how he survived the accident. And he said, the accident broke my neck. It didn't break my spirit.
Mhm.
And he felt like all the growth that he had in the last 20 years would never have occurred but for this accident. And he actually had gratitude in a weird way for the growth, not for obviously the accident, but so I found myself at that exact same crossroads. It was really that simple. I had a choice. I could stay in the very dark spot, which I didn't want to. I'm an optimist by nature, but this floored me like nothing I've ever been hit by. Or I could walk to the light and just pick up myself one day at a time, 1 minute at a time. It started that slow, and just kind of find little joys, smile again, laugh again, go out instead of hibernating. Everything in my life changed, and I had to embrace it, and I had to embrace letting go. And I realized in that process, I wasn't letting go of Jake. I was letting go of my suffering.
Mm, that's a good point. That's such a huge point. My father, when my brother died, he started up his own company. It changed his life drastically, and he started a truck corporation, rebuilding. He's a Royal Mechanical Engineer in the Army, and then
Okay.
decided to start rebuilding engines. I bought that corporation and now run that corporation.
Wow.
It's done, I think we're in 35 years. And so I personally resonate with your story, as my father too, I watched fall to the depths and then all of a sudden rise and quit a huge corporate job and say, this is what I'm doing. And, to go to a dirty shop in the back, and I'm like, what are you doing? And I just remember as a child thinking, well, there goes my car at 16. And there goes, because you had this idea of what your life was like. And then, had I known, my father gave me the greatest gift in the world, way beyond a car, and that was resiliency, watching
Yeah.
it go. So, I'm sure not only is Liam staring at you, but the rest of the world going, wow. So, what through the writing and in the books, I'd love to dive into the book. And I know that there's what I love about it is there's inspirational quotes. It comes from that positive perspective. But what are some of the challenges you think people face in grief, and how do you think they can kind of overcome them?
Yeah. I think we all feel alone
Yeah.
in our misery and suffering, and we're not. So reach out, because people are there to help. Like you said earlier, grief is scary, and so some people aren't going to be equipped to help that maybe you thought would be able to. You may make some new friends, people that are have that fiber in them, that they can be there for you and stand in the darkness. That it's okay to feel shitty.
Mm,
Don't beat yourself up.
yeah.
It's okay. These are all phases. Everything changes. And you just got to believe that it will change.
Yeah.
Have hope. Hope is, I think, vital. I joke that it's, we have this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and at the bottom is food and water and shelter and air. And I believe hope should be there. Because if you don't have hope, I don't think you have a shot. So you got to have hope. And whether that's faith or just hope is fine. But I can't imagine being hopeless. I certainly felt like that a few times, but I was quickly able to get myself out of that and realize, no, it's going to change. Getting help from a therapist is big. And again, men don't like to cry. Men don't like to open up about their feelings. We're taught to be tough. We're taught, not to show vulnerability. But what I learned in this process is that our vulnerability is our strength. And it's really been empowering for me to embrace that and kind of live it out as a model. And going back to Liam, kids, and I'm sorry about the passing of your brother. And it sounds like you were young when that happened.
Yes, I
And I
will.
look at Liam, and Liam, they call the children the forgotten grievers because nobody wants to talk to a kid, right? The last thing they want to do is upset you or Liam and cause more pain and suffering. Your peers aren't equipped to talk about it at that age. So they kind of, everyone's focused on the parents. And so the siblings kind of become they call them the forgotten grievers. And so I was very aware of that and trying to make sure that Liam had support, and he's still in therapy. We're all still in therapy. It's been very positive for us, and it's saved our lives, honestly.
That's so beautiful. And that's the thing. And as everybody knows, a vulnerable man showing his emotions is extremely sexy. I think that a lot of men don't
Yeah.
see that part, but if you were to ask a woman, oh yeah, yeah. There's something endearing and beautiful about it that causes you to have this closer, intimate relationship. And I know in my career and working with men and returning from deployment and things like that, they often wanted to get it out and then go home and be tough. And it's like, no, take that part of you home, because I guarantee your relationship will broaden, and there will be a whole other side that somebody never saw of you that loves you. Um,
Hmm.
but it's very hard, man or woman, to express vulnerability around this. Um, in your book, like, is there a favorite quote or inspiration? And are these the ones, as we're talking, the ones that you might have wrote on mirrors to your children or to your boys?
Yeah, a lot of these were, some aren't, but most of them were.
Cool.
Um, and they were about values, like
Uh,
integrity and honesty and authenticity and forgiveness and accountability and responsibility and perseverance, all the things that I believe mattered and that would help them. So, picking one is my favorite is incredibly hard. And one of my favorites probably isn't even in the book, and it's a C.S. Lewis quote, which is his presence is like the sky, or the void, it's everywhere. And that's kind of how I feel about Jake. I mean, he's everywhere. I feel him.
mhm.
Um, but he was so immense as a personality that reminds, when I look at this guy, I just see Jake and feel Jake and know that he's there.
I love that. I love that because to me, um, presently with Grief Uprooted in my career, I'm looking for that space for people who are grieving. And what I mean by that is we have the stages of grief that we've all been following. But the creator of that, Kubler-Ross, even says in her own writings, this was created for the dying. And I think there's a drastic difference between going, I'm dying, or someone I love died. Our response
Yeah.
is completely different. They're similar, but just being able to create that space in this world, in this society, and say, okay, we have these that we're following when you're dying. What about when you're grieving? We need our own space. And
Yeah.
that's an integration because I believe that the people we've lost are the sky, are like in the sense around us,
Hmm.
no matter your belief system. Um,
Right.
but I noticed when prior to this, we were talking about speaking, and you were talking about how you weren't a speaker, and now all of a sudden you're this motivational speaker. And so, where did you get the courage to all of a sudden come out of this shell and be like, okay, I'm going to stand up here now and talk? Like, that's a huge endeavor. Um,
Yeah. I mean, I didn't even intend to. We created a couple scholarships in Jake's name, and I went down to University of South Carolina, where I went to college and where Jake aspired to go. And we started a scholarship there because I felt as his father, it was my responsibility to make sure he got there. And so I went down to award the first scholarship, and it's a walk-on scholarship for a student athlete who plays football at the university. And in awarding that, I was given the opportunity to talk to the team and the entire staff, and it was just Jake. That's all I can really say. I had some notes, but it was like everything that came through me was Jake, and I told them about Jake and what he stood for and what he would say if he was standing right there, because I felt like he was. I was so nervous. I felt like my whole body was shaking. Yet when I later watched it, I was completely composed and for the most part. but it was Jake. And when I left that room and went outside, I mean, I just lost it. It took every ounce of my being to be able to do that. And when I was alone and able to call my wife and share what had just happened and the power of it, seeing the joy in the young man who received the scholarship. He looked like Jake a little bit. I just saw the joy in his face. But then when it hit me, the whole thing, it really hit. And I've learned that with that too. You just got to let it wash over you.
Yeah.
And it comes and it goes. It's, you mentioned like the difference between the dying and the grieving. And, there's not a linear process to this. It's not like, oh, you hit this stage, now you're fine. And no, it comes and goes, and it's non-linear. Like I mentioned earlier, we're coming up on the 4-year marker, and some days it feels like 4 days or 4 weeks. And all of a sudden it becomes hard again.
Yeah, that's so true.
And
That's so true.
my wife's there right now. She's having an emergency therapy session today with our therapist. She's in a really rough spot again.
Yeah. And it's something that integrates into who you are. It's not anything you ever get over.
No,
It becomes part of who you are.
yeah.
And so if people want to get your book, where would they go to find your book and learn more about you?
Yeah, it's online. So it's available via Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, Target. You can go to my website, which is stephenpanus.com, where there's more information about the book, Jake, my public speaking, and events and things like that. So yeah, I'm around, and I do a lot of speaking now because I find that it not only helps me, but it helps others.
Mhm.
And that's why ultimately the book is out there, because I wanted to help others. That's the one thing that brings me joy, keeps me connected to Jake, and it's the only future I have with him. So taking him on this journey is meaningful to me, and I think to any bereaved parent, because I get to hear his name said. People say his name, people write about him, and it allows his legacy of lifting up others and spreading joy to endure.
I love that. I love that. So if you want to get Walk On, obviously I'm going to put it in our notes and everything. And it's Stephen Panus, Panus. You can visit Amazon. You can visit your website, which is stephenpanus.com, I would assume.
Correct. Yep.
Just Google him. I have found him everywhere when I Google him. I just want to say thank you for coming on. And I love your story, as sad and as heart-wrenching as it is. But that end of growth and rising up and walking on is commendable. And I thank you for all the good you're doing in the world, because you are. And as we all know, it is only together that we grieve, and it is only together that we heal. Take care, everybody. Grief Uprooted professional grief and empowerment coaching are not to be used as a substitute for professional advice by legal, medical, financial, business, spiritual, or other qualified professionals. All our products and services are designed for grief empowerment through learning and sharing of one's lived experiences.